Welcome everybody, and I'm really excited about today's conversation for Architect Tomorrow. So last year we did a 2021 predictions conversation, and so this year I'm really pleased to be joined by an all-female panel. So we have Jessie, we have Whynde, we have Sally here to talk about what we see coming in 2022. Perhaps if I could just get each of you ladies just to briefly introduce yourself. Jessie, if we can start with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Oliver, and great to be here. I'm Jessie Bland, Senior Planner at Harvard, a marketing and PR agency that specialises in helping tech brands make their moves. So really interested in all the implications of kind of tech trends and how that changes what we do from a marketing and a comms perspective.
Whynde Kuehn, longtime business architecture practitioner, thought leader, educator, helping organizations to architect business. All right, so these trends are really important, and use the discipline to execute strategy and transform. So great to be here.
Thanks, Whynde. And Sally.
My name is Sally Pritchard. I'm head of product and proposition at Ordnance Survey. My role is helping our utility customers solve their most wicked problems through technology solutions.
Brilliant. And staying with you, Sally, you and I featured on the last edition of the trends sort of discussion. Was there anything that sort of stood out to you that we got right or got wrong from that conversation?
Before doing this call, I did have a chance to have a peek back at the recording. I was saying to the lovely ladies earlier, that was a modern form of torture, watching myself speak. But moving on from that, actually, the biggest thing that struck me that I got right, because we're discussing Brexit, is because we just got on with those huge shocks of COVID, that actually organisations are just incredibly indexing well for resilience and responsiveness. But I think there's a consequence that I don't think I could have foreseen around the exhaustion within the business of always being ready. It's interesting to me that we had some sort of confidence and prowess around, we can do this, we've got this, don't worry about Brexit, because look what we've lived through. And actually now, as time goes on, I'm seeing those longer term impacts coming through around employee resilience, the great resignation that why am I still working? Why is everyone resigning? So we talked about last year about being able to survive, and I think that's exactly what we did. It's interesting to me now, what are the consequences of that survival mode?
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think you're right, the almost change fatigue, or like response fatigue, if that's even a phrase. Like, what's the next thing going to be? Supply chain was relatively recent, workforce shortages, like you say, it's resignations. I think there was a whole load more stuff that we would never perhaps been able to predict. I mean, perhaps it all falls under the kind of broader headings of, like you say, the Brexit fallout, the sort of COVID fallout. And I guess we talk right now as we just discover that the UK has 3 cases of the new COVID variant, right? And I think one of the things I mentioned last time was we just don't know what else COVID is going to throw our way. And we think about change fatigue and transformation fatigue. Whynde, I don't know if is that something that sort of resonates with you? How have you found sort of 2021 in terms of businesses responding to the next sort of problem, the next challenge?
I do think very much there is a change fatigue, and I do think we've been in a bit of survival mode, but I think we have been going for long enough that now we're starting to turn it into a place to thrive, a place to, like, that is the normal, where we've seen business models, for example, being really adaptive. And this idea of digital transformation, I really feel like in 2021, it went from something that was maybe a little foreign to people and they were just going through the motions to we get it. It's here now. It's real. So familiarity in resilience and adaptation, and really being able to leverage that we live in a locationless digital world, and that means a lot of opportunity. And the great resignation point is I think good from the perspective that certain things that were underlying that just weren't good for people, they came to the surface, and this sort of gave us the permission and ability to take our lives and our jobs back.
Now, that's fascinating. I really like that point about, and I think linked to that, it made people perhaps realize what's important to them. Like, why am I traveling, spending all this time traveling for work? I'm going to change that. I know I touched on that over the course of this year. My neighbour, she had a long commute, sort of 3-4 hours a day, and she just said to her place, look, I've proved I can do it. I'm going to come into the office once or twice a week now. And initially it was a bit like, ooh, but it's worked. But Jessie, what struck you in 2021? Has there been anything in your sort of day-to-day, either work or sort of personal life, that sort of really struck you as surprising?
I mean, there's two things for me. I think there's one, and Whynde's already kind of touched on it, around how much kind of digital transformation sped up. So people, plans that people had for 5 years' time happened during the space of a few months because people had to. And I think the ramifications from that, from a cultural perspective and a tech perspective. So how do you go back and look at all the new software you put in place, and does it work with everything else, and is it secure, and have we made the right decisions, and have we built the processes around that? And then the kind of cultural side of it as well, around all these changes we've suddenly made to remote working. What do we bring back into place as well? I think that's going to be super interesting. So hybrid working, realizing that actually pure remote working that also has its downfalls as well. And I think that's what's interesting is, for me, in the last year, is seeing, as we've kind of slowly started to come out of COVID, hopefully, see kind of the elements that people have decided to keep or go back to. That's been really interesting to me and surprising. The things that people actually say, actually, I do 1 or 2 days a week, I do actually enjoy a commute because it means that I get a break and I have a chance to switch off and stuff. The other part as well is just around how our reactions to this type of crisis kind of changes as consumers, changes as people as well. You look back at the 2008 financial crisis and everything that changed there. You suddenly get a spring of new innovation, you get new companies being born, new ways of doing things. So I'm always fascinated by watching that and seeing that happen, and disruption that comes out of the back of a crisis. So yeah, they're probably two things that kind of surprised me, and just interested to see kind of how they kind of roll out in the next year as well.
Sally, talking about sort of changes, what have you seen in your sort of day-to-day working world changed?
I think I've had a slightly different experience around people choosing to work. We've actually struggled to get people back into the office because culturally, Ordnance Survey had such a sort of university feel. It had like a campus approach. It was very collegiate. And then when all that stopped, it was never going to be back how it was in a hybrid world. Equally, we recruited heavily across the UK, so you can't do those old things of expecting people to come back even just on a Wednesday, because we have our talent in Cornwall and Scotland and further. So that really surprised me, that there wasn't that, to use a government phrase, the bounce back. But that might be different experiences in different organisations. I think from a serving our customers' perspectives, what it feels like the again, another consulting term, the low-hanging fruit around the obvious innovations have been found. Yeah. And now it's problems that intersect society, government, commerce, and the business cases, just that in the traditional sense of forming a business case, don't easily stack up on a piece of paper. Recently did a fantastic design sprint with a water company in collaboration with charities, landowners, bringing everyone together to solve a problem around improving water quality by helping landowners, be more informed about what's put on their land. And there's a very clear problem there and a very clear link between cause and action, but getting the stakeholders and the energy and quite frankly the money together to progress is really, really challenging. So that's what, in my intro, the most wicked problems, it seems like we need to get comfortable with not having the obvious ROI numbers in our business cases, and somehow include other indicators within our decision making, so we lean in. And Oliver, to your opening, move from greenwashing to action, that's really, really hard.
If organizations can be brave enough to kind of go beyond the traditional financial return, at least until you've done discovery, right, until you've understood what the sort of problem looks like from a multi-stakeholder perspective. I really like your point about the problems we're facing into now are sort of multi-stakeholder and multi-organization, and you need to kind of collaborate and almost create like an ecosystem approach. And I think the thing is, until you've often explored potential partnerships or potential opportunities to work on things a different way, you don't even necessarily know what the numbers look like. You don't know where the costs are going to get apportioned, let alone what returns you're going to get on this sort of stuff. So I think to Jessie's point, seeing some of the innovation, seeing some of the pivots that the organisations have made over the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, has been really interesting. And I think the ones that have been braver and gone, do you know what, we don't quite know how this is going to look yet, but we're going to go with it. I think those have been the sort of really interesting ones. Whynde, I'm keen to kind of get your view on that, but also if there's anything perhaps from the Scandinavian perspective that I know you sort of bring to the mix here today. The rest of us are UK, but your American / sort of Norwegian sort of influences. I'm interested to see if there's anything in Norway that surprised you, or the US, but equally, what's your sort of take on what we've just been talking about?
Oh yeah, but for me, having moved to Scandinavia not too long ago, it was really interesting coming from an American context just to see how things have been handled differently. I find just the underpinning of the society and the values became very different during the pandemic. In Norway, it was more of a rally together. Let's get through this, whatever we need to do. In the States, there was a little bit of tension around some of these things. There's a little bit more of back to business as usual here, back to offices full time. So it's just interesting to see that part in particular hasn't really caught on, yeah.
And I know, Jessie, one of the things that I found really interesting from your report on the trends that Harvard sees coming is the over-indexing on remote work and hybrid work, right? Because it's a very, I suppose, privileged position to be in, where you can choose to work remotely, right? And what was really eye-opening for me, and I look forward to talking a bit more about your report, was that just the stats on the number of people that actually can work remotely is a lot smaller than a lot of people thought, right? There was still a lot of people going into their workplaces because they're in manufacturing or they're in a field role.
Globally anyway, 80% of workers don't work at a desk. So that is quite shocking. And I think it's still something that society at large is probably not quite akin to. I think when you think about the nature of a lot of people that work in technology, in corporate businesses, in comms and in the media, we are all desk workers. So I think there's a real interesting kind of perspective that we're so biased to the idea that of course you can work from home, of course you can do those things. And I think what we started to see through the pandemic, looking at frontline workers, not just as healthcare workers, but as you said, everyone that works in kind of field roles, in retail, in manufacturing, we're expecting that we're going to start to see a bit more of a shift and kind of onus on those people and how tech can support them, and I guess how the business can really invest in them a bit more. I think historically, a lot of investment has always gone on to desk workers. So obviously when Microsoft kind of came out with Windows and everything like that, it's all been focused on kind of how we can best support desk workers. I think that's going to be really interesting to start to see, and some of that kind of power dynamic changing, especially as well. There's been such a, again during the pandemic, such a kind of fight and a kind of combat for who can win, who owns your desktop essentially. And there's lots of companies realizing that from a B2B perspective, they're actually overlapping more and more. There's a lot of kind of frenemies, things like that. So it's such an interesting space. But I think the frontline workers and how we can empower them through tech is going to be a real kind of interesting space to watch.
Before we move on to 2022, any other thoughts on 2021 highlights or lowlights that any of you want to share before we move on?
I'll add another highlight, and I think that was the awareness of climate change and the urgency and the move into action really moved into a forefront. We've just gotten past, we just need to do it. And I think it really put a fire under that and gave us a new platform for it.
No, that's a great highlight, Whynde. And I hope we can continue the momentum behind that, right? And we'll definitely come on to that when we talk about next year. Sally, anything else that you'd add?
Well, I was just going to say it's really striking to me that I'm still in my spare bedroom. Like for me, my whole way of working has completely changed. I work in big corporates because I love working with people. I love collaborating. I'm a social ideas person, and work has become very transactional, and I mean, not just when do you say positive, but some of the fun has dropped out of work for me, and as I said, getting people into work seems to be a bit more stick than carrot, and I think for me personally, I've lost the serendipity and just bumping into someone and sparking off a really interesting conversation. I don't have those for me at the moment. Obviously I go into work for meetings, but it's very structured. There's an outcome, you know, you go in and then you leave again. So I guess I'm missing that work community.
Yeah, almost scheduling serendipity, which is a complete and utter oxymoron, right? And I'm with you. I must confess, 2021 for me hasn't been easy in terms of the remote work thing. I think initially last year, 2020, I thought, hey, this is great. I can be very flexible about where I work. But I'm with you. It's certainly not as fun because I'm far more of a social person than I think I ever realized I was. So yeah, I think there's been some highlights certainly, but no, I think 2021 has been a difficult year, I think, for a lot of people for various reasons, right? And so yes, I'm sort of looking forward to moving on.